Class is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
To our webinar. My name is Mandy Taylor, and we will go ahead and get started as it is 4 o'clock. Thank you for joining our webinar on elements E through H of Standard 4 in the North Carolina Professional Teaching Standards. We want to take a minute and do a little bit of housekeeping. If you can hear my voice, if you would please click on the hand icon and raise your hand so that we know we are broadcasting. Thank you. I see some hands going up. As we go through our webinar today, if you have any questions, if you would please put them in the questions bar. I have colleagues on the line who will be able to help answer those questions, and we will stop periodically to answer questions. We will typically reply with a quick thank you as well to make sure that everyone on the line can read the questions. We do not have any handouts posted today, but today's presentation as well as an archived version of this webinar will be posted on the NCEES wiki, and we will make sure that you have the information to locate these resources from the wiki. Once again, my name is Mandy Taylor. I'm a professional development coordinator with the NCDPI, and on the line today with me is Heather Stewart. And we also have Kimberly Simmons and Delia Payne who are helping us out with the questions bar. Just a few norms for our time together today. Please minimize your outside distractions. If you are having any difficulties, please raise your hand and we will assist you as quickly as possible. And again, if you have any questions, please use the questions bar to ask them. So after our time together today and during our time, we hope to build knowledge of the professional teaching standards with a specific focus on Standard 4, elements E through H. We want to look at using the language of the rubric to learn actions and behaviors that are aligned to the descriptors. We want to share some NCEES resources with you, as well as reflect on ideas learned and the impact on teaching practice. So let's jump right in. So this is just an overview of the elements we're going to be looking at today, E through H. Teachers help students develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills. Element F, to work in teams and develop leadership qualities. Element G, teachers communicate effectively. And finally, they use a wide variety of methods to assess what each student has learned. We want to use a close reading strategy to explore the elements. So this quote from Park just helps explain what we mean by close reading. That process allows readers to reflect on the meaning of individual words and sentences, the order that the sentences unfold, and the development of the ideas over the course of the text, which in this case will be the rubric. And that reflection and development ultimately leads students to arrive at an understanding of the text as a whole. We want to really drill down today to focusing on the proficient column, but we will also look forward to accomplished. So we'll focus on proficient, but look at the language as it moves across the continuum into accomplished. So when we look at a close read, we try to dissect the verbs and the nouns in not only the elements in the gray box, but the descriptors as well. And when we do that, we start to uncover some patterns. So if you look at the first column, recognizes data sources important to planning instruction. This descriptor might just be summarized with a question, do you know it? Does the teacher recognize that data? Do they know the data that is important to planning instruction? As you move to the right one column, the language turns to uses a variety of data and monitors and modifies instructional plans. So now we have a question of, do you show it? When you move to the third column, monitors student performance and responds to individual learning needs. Now the focus of the action is on the students. Is what's happening in the classroom, is what the teacher's doing visible in the actions of your students? And finally, we look at visible beyond the instructional space of the classroom. So student performance and responding to cultural diversity and learning needs through the school improvement process. So now it's not just related to the classroom context, but it's about the whole process of school improvement, visible beyond the instructional space of the classroom. And we can drill these questions down to one word: knowledge, action, interaction, and extension. So these are some patterns that emerge as we engage in a close read of the standards. So when we look at the continuum overall, we know that it moves from developing, which is at the bottom of the screen, up towards distinguished practice. And when you take those one-word summaries that we just looked at, you can see that application as well, growing from knowledge to action, interaction, and extension, and again, bringing those questions into the scaffold as well. Do they know it? Do teachers know it? Do they show it in the behaviors in the classroom? Is it visible in the actions of the students? And finally, is it visible beyond the scope of the classroom? Is there an impact on others? So we've kind of given you a preview of how we want to organize our learning today with the standards. We want to engage in a close reading. We want to spend some time unpacking that element, and then we want to look at the impact on practice. We're going to start with element 4E today. When we look at just the language in the gray box, we see the sentence in bold: teachers help students develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills. They encourage students to ask questions, think creatively, develop and test innovative ideas, synthesize knowledge, and draw conclusions. They help students exercise and communicate sound reasoning, understand connections, make complex choices, and frame, analyze, and solve problems. So we highlighted some of these pieces, and we'll come back to that in the next slide, but we want to take just a minute and look at these descriptors as well. So demonstrates, there's our verb, demonstrates what? The knowledge of the processes needed to support students in acquiring critical thinking and problem-solving skills. So that would be the proficient column. As we look forward to the next column, teachers teach the students the processes needed to. And you can see by looking in the box all of the different processes that the teacher helps the student become proficient in. So we pull the keywords from the descriptor and the element: help students, critical thinking, problem solving, questions, innovative ideas, and processes. So I want to look at the box, the gray box on the right of this slide. Those are all of those processes, all of those thinking skills and problem-solving skills that teachers are asked to support students with. So now if you look back to the key verbs, this is what teachers need to help students demonstrate, and it's what teachers need to teach students to be able to do over the course of the year. So when we look at that proficient column, really drilling down into that, there are a couple of resources that are available to you, again, through the NCEES Wiki. One of them is a reflective questions document that is designed to for administrators to carry on conversations in post-observation conferences, and for teachers also to get prepared for that conference. So you'll find questions like, how is this lesson part of a bigger unit of study where students solve a problem or generate a solution? Or how do you ensure that students are developing critical thinking skills? We also have a second document that we will again make sure you know how to access, an evidences and behaviors document. And this document is designed to give examples of what might be observed during a classroom observation with element 4E. Utilizes scientific method and inquiry within a lesson, or guides students to create discussion questions to be used for literature circles. Provides multi-step problems and verbal explanation of the process within the lesson, or instructs students on the processes necessary to answer higher level questions. So we look at impact on practice. The first resource we want to share with you is a listing of online modules that are available for free for North Carolina educators. And while this is coming up, one of the features of this set of resources is the ability to drill down by standard and locate modules. So you can see that Heather clicked on the by standards tab at the top. And so you have the not only the North Carolina Professional Teaching Standards, but just as an FYI, you also have school executive standards and the competencies. So for today, we look at standard 4, and we can go down to element E, and notice it says click to view aligned courses. So these are all of the opportunities that are available to support teacher understanding and development in 4E. And you'll notice there's self-paced modules. At this time, we are not offering instructor-led courses, but the self-paced modules and mini modules are available. And we pulled out the names of some of those courses as well. And then we also listed some resources below. Reading Rockets has a particularly robust section here on developing critical thinking skills. So they review what those higher order questioning examples, they give you some examples, but they also give you some resources for exploring what the strategies for enhancing those skills in the classroom. And it's just a really robust resource for exploring higher order thinking and critical thinking. All right, Heather, I think, do we have any questions that we need to consider?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we will move on to element 4F. Teachers help students work in teams and develop leadership qualities. So again, you can see the words that we've highlighted here in the element. Teaching the importance of cooperation and collaboration, organize learning teams in order to help students define roles, strengthen social ties, improve communication and collaborative skills, interact with people from different cultures and backgrounds, and develop leadership qualities. So when we drill down into the descriptors, we start with proficient. Organizes is the verb here, so the teacher is organizing student learning teams for the explicit purpose of developing cooperation, collaboration, and student leadership. But as you look forward to accomplished, now students are being encouraged. So the teacher is not doing the organizing, but the encouraging students to create and manage the learning teams. So we look at our keywords, the teams, student learning teams, collaboration, cooperation, leadership, and the verbs organizes and develop. So again, pulling some reflective questions to consider. How do you determine leaders in the groups and in the class? And how do you ensure students' acquisition of leadership skills are two examples. There are also some evidences to consider, incorporating peer review and evaluations as part of the learning process, and utilizing a variety of grouping strategies based on data. So again, we've pulled out some modules from RT3NC that might be beneficial for this element, and we've also listed some additional resources. Note the last two resources, 20 collaborative learning tips. It's just exactly what it says it is, a nice listing of different ways to facilitate collaborative learning in classrooms. And then in that article, it mentions specifically jigsaws, so this is a nice companion for that. 7 different ways to organize and use jigsaw in your classroom. All right, Heather, do we have any questions?
So just a few about being able to access the resources. So just as a reminder, the PowerPoint presentation and a recording of this webinar will be posted on the NCEES Wiki space under archived webinars. We'll post the NCEES Wiki space link for you in the questions bar shortly. For those of you who may have missed the deep dive into the other standards, someone asked about they missed standard 3. Well, that archived webinar and the PowerPoint presentation that includes all of the links to the resources is posted on the NCEES Wiki space under the archived webinars. So just know that it'll be there, and we'll put that NCEES Wiki space link in the questions bar, and everyone will have access to that. And then a couple other folks were just mentioning how they thought the resources were great and that Jigsaw is wonderful and that they use it all the time. And one question was, how often do you share information from particular standards with other support staff in the building, like counselors or social workers, etc.? And just an opinion of that it would be a great value to having a deeper understanding across all staff members, not just teachers. Great point. Thank you for making that. Mandy, do you want to respond to how often you think, or?
I think some opportunities may present themselves when you're developing IEPs and having conversations about how to support the needs of students with other colleagues in the building, so that might present a natural opportunity to bring up some standards work. You also may be able to have some conversations at the beginning of the year with PDP development as you're looking, perhaps collaborating with colleagues in the building to meet your goals or help them meet their goals. So that might be an opportunity to do that as well. And perhaps some opportunities could arise through PLC meetings when you're looking at data and analyzing that data and looking for some strategies to address gaps that you find through the data. So just kind of off the top of my head, I'm just thinking through situations where it might be natural to reach out and start those conversations.
Absolutely. Great question, great comments. Thank you for that. For the rest of the group, please continue to post suggestions, ideas, and responses to the questions that were posed, and we will continue forward. We're going to take a moment now and look at element 4G. 4G, teachers communicate effectively. When we look at the gray box and look at the language in the gray box, it tells us a lot about what this element is really about. Teachers communicate effectively. How do they do that? They communicate in ways that are clearly understood by their students. They are perceptive listeners and are able to communicate with students in a variety of ways, even when language is a barrier. Teachers help students articulate thoughts and ideas clearly and effectively. So element E, teachers communicate effectively. So we want to know how they do that. And so thinking in terms of proficient and moving into the accomplished descriptors, we look at the descriptors. And the first row there uses a variety of methods for communication with all students. And then moving into accomplished, so we have the action and then the interaction, creates a variety of methods to communicate with all students. Moving down, the other descriptor consistently encourages and supports students to articulate thoughts and ideas clearly and effectively. The action, what do the teachers do? And then moving into the interaction, establishes classroom practices which encourage all students to develop effective communication skills. As we pull out what we highlighted, you can see that the keywords are variety of methods, communications, all students, consistently, students again, articulate thoughts and ideas, and we want to use and encourage. It's all about communication and a variety of ways in which we communicate, and we need to keep in mind what those ways are. And so we can use two resources, the reflective questions document and evidence and behaviors document, to help us think and reflect about our practices. And I can, as a teacher, ask myself, which non-traditional platforms for communication do I use? Wikis, blogs, social media? Am I meeting the learning styles when I'm teaching? Am I showing it? Am I modeling it? Do I use a website to support students with instruction? And then the evidence, use the evidence and behaviors that might come up for element 4G would be using a variety of communication techniques, using written and oral strategies, demonstrating helpful body language when communicating, using vocabulary and sentence constructs that are easily understood by students and parents. There are some resources that align to standard 4G. Some of the self-paced courses that we're noting here are about the 21st century mentoring and responsibilities of the 21st century educator, and supporting English language learners in the classroom, an action research project from GTN. Those are some great courses that would give you some professional learning around this area of communication. And then a couple of links we want to point out are things like Classroom 21. So the ways in which we communicate are really important. It's that 21st century educator is all about the 4 C's, right? Remember what the 4 C's are? The communication, creativity, collaboration, and critical thinking. And there is a wiki space that's devoted to resources around those 4 ideas around 21st century learning. And I know that right here in the trainings, for example, that creating a 21st century classroom, there is an entire piece on, and that's not the right one, there's an entire piece on communication. Well, it's in here somewhere. And there's a 4 C's toolbox that shows tools that go underneath each area. And when we think about communication tools, here are a variety of tools that are available to help us communicate with students or to have students communicate with one another. So some great resources listed here. The other one to point out are things like Pinterest. Many of you might use Pinterest. You might use it for your recipes. You might use it for your design ideas or gardening ideas. Well, Pinterest actually has a variety of information for educators. Keep in mind, it's an open source website, so not everything is research-based, not everything is perfect, but it's a great starting point. When we think about our learners and having them learn how to communicate, one of the ways in which they'll do that is through writing and response writing and showing comprehension. And what better way to differentiate, which we know is also part of another element and part of another standard, is by using choice boards. So here in Pinterest, if we just look at choice boards, there's a huge variety there of ideas that can help us, just a good starting place. Something like the nonfiction reading response. So here's a tic-tac-toe board where it's just nonfiction reading response. So some great ideas and a great starting place. Are there any questions about element G?
No, not at this time.
Fantastic. All right. The next element is element H. Teachers use a variety of methods to assess what each student has learned. And again, we want to do that close read, that deep dive into the language. When we look at the gray box, the language in the gray box says teachers use a variety of methods to assess what each student has learned. Well, how do they do that? Teachers use multiple indicators, including formative and summative assessments, to evaluate student progress and growth as they strive to eliminate achievement gaps. Teachers provide opportunities, methods, feedback, and tools for students to assess themselves and each other. Teachers use 21st century assessment systems to inform instruction and demonstrate evidence of students' 21st century knowledge, skills, performance, and dispositions. I know you heard assessments and 21st century and formative throughout. And so if we look through the proficient and accomplished descriptors, looking across the continuum under proficient uses multiple indicators, both formative and summative, to monitor and evaluate student progress to inform instruction. So we want to assess where they're at to inform instruction so we can make changes as needed. And that's what the teacher does. And then to move across the continuum, the interaction piece uses the information gained from the assessment activities to improve teaching practice and student learning. The next set of descriptors provides evidence that students attain 21st century knowledge and skills and dispositions. And then moving across the continuum for interaction provides opportunities for students to assess themselves and others. So multiple ways in which we answer the question, what do I need to know and do, and how do I know I've learned it? And so looking through the gray box and the descriptors, we can pull out those keywords and key verbs, multiple indicators, formative and summative assessment, monitor, evaluate, student progress, evidence, 21st century knowledge, skills, dispositions, and the verbs uses and provides. So to help us with thinking through what that might look in the class, we can have use some reflective questions that help us think about our practice. What types of formative assessments do I use? What types of summative assessment do I use? Do I have a balance? If 25% of my students fail a test, what do I do? And then evidence and behaviors in my classroom that my evaluator might be looking for are that I use formative and summative data to assess student progress, informally check student learning throughout the lesson through brief oral discussions and assessments, or check periodically during the lesson to ensure student understanding. And if I need to know more about that, I can go to the online modules and I can search by the standard and the element, and some of the self-paced courses I might find are action research for the classroom, data literacy in action, integrating student-created videos into the classroom, introduction to data literacy, and many more. There are actually many more aligned to this element. And some of the resources, again, are Wiki Central, Pinterest, Teacher Vision, Tech Tools for the Classroom, and there's a website called Informal Assessments A to Z. If we want to think about formative assessments and how to use them in the classroom, and we're not sure about which ones to use, or we want to find some different ones other than thumbs up, thumbs down, or using whiteboards, you can find an entire list here to get you started. You saw anticipatory guides, entrance, exit cards, four corners, using graphic organizers. These are all ways in which we can assess learning. I want to pause here because this concludes all of the elements that we're discussing today under Standard 4. And I want to pause here for any questions about the standard and the elements we reviewed today or any of the resources. So at this time, please post any questions that you have in the questions bar, and we'll try to answer those. Mandy, do we have any questions?
No, I think that we are doing well. We may be getting a question in about the 4 C's.
Yes, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. Those are what we consider the 4 C's of the 21st century learner.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that's our only question at the moment, but please do continue to post those as you have them. Oh, we do have one more. How do you move from proficient to accomplished when using assessment sheets?
Well, let's go back. Let's go back and let's look at the information in the descriptors. Okay.
And
so again, it's element 4H, and it is using a variety of methods to assess what each student has learned. And thinking about the continuum as do you know it, do you show it, is it visible in the actions of your students? So first, do you know it? Do you know about a variety of different methods to assess student learning? Utilizing informal formative assessments, things like thumbs up, thumbs down, whiteboards, just quick checks, entrance slips, exit slips. And then your more formalized ones where you can use like quick quizzes like Kahoot or your SchoolNet, and then you can use summative assessments. And so just knowing about those. And then using them. That is the proficient, that we're using them and gathering data. Moving toward accomplished, as you can see, is that you're using the information really about improving teachers, so it's changing your practice, you're modifying what you're doing, and then student learning, that it is directly impacting the results that they have on the assessments. And so it's not just about using the assessment, but that as a result of gathering the data, that change has occurred in teacher behavior and then in student learning and student practices. And then keep in mind that that interaction piece is about students learning together, being collaborative, using those critical thinking skills, communicating with one another. Hopefully that helps. Mandy, anything to add to that?
Nope, and yes, that did help. Thank you.
Please continue to put the questions in the questions bar. As you consider moving forward and thinking in terms of, and a couple folks have already asked about, what should we do with this information? Just some considerations to think about, that it's important to have a common understanding of the rubric and how it's used. And so together, you and your colleagues, taking this back, being the reflective practitioner that you are, taking this back and sharing this information. And that evidence should be a collaborative conversation between principals and teachers, together having that understanding about what should be seen in the classroom, and that everyone agreeing that this is what it looks like to be, maybe to have actions that fall under the proficient descriptors, and then other behaviors that fall under accomplished behaviors, kind of like what you asked earlier about formative assessment. Great question. So determine that common understanding about what the descriptors mean together, and that the evidences provided are samples from these documents, as well as the reflective questions, and they are starting points for these discussions, and then of course others can be added. Our contact information is listed on the PowerPoint presentation, and if any time you have any questions or need more resources, please contact us at any time. We do have more webinars coming up as we conclude the school year. There's a webinar on the NCEES School Executive Standard 4, Human Resource Leadership. There's a webinar on teacher-led conferences, a webinar on the Executive Standard 5, and Executive Standard 6 and 7. We will stay on the line for additional questions. This does conclude the webinar at this time, and thank you very much for participating.